In this lesson, we're going to be focusing on the various elements that are the children, the flex items, and how we can apply different properties, how we can set the different values to those elements individually. And in this case, we've got an example here where we've changed the order of the elements, so applying the order. We've also done an align self and putting that purple element there at the bottom, and whereas we see that the parent has center for the rest of the elements. So it's taking the available space and then it's either aligning them accordingly. There's also an option to set a default width. So we've set that they're going to be 33% across. So that's going to be the default width for the page elements. So as we adjust them, we see that they're automatically going to be taking the available spacing. So the different flex properties that we can apply to the children, the flex items that are within the flex container. That's going to be covered in this lesson. We'll be looking at the properties of the children within the Flexbox. So we're creating a brand new flex file. We'll call it flex3. We're going to need to still keep the same content here where we've got the flex. So let's just save this as flex3. And clean up some of the code from the last lesson where we're just going to have the flex, and then we can keep the different element heights as well. So that's going to be our default page, the way that our page is looking. So we've got the element and the value there because this is being applied from the line height. So let's actually get rid of some of this line height as well. So we've got all of the content there and we've got them evenly distributed with the defaults where it's stretching it out automatically depending on the size that we have for the main container. So we've deployed flex display for the elements, and I'm also going to apply some properties to that flex where we'll do a flex wrap. So they can wrap to the next line. And that will space out the elements to be whatever the default width would have been for the elements, and it's just wrapping them to the next line as needed. So we saw that we can change the order of the elements. So let's say, for instance, we want this element to show up under order number 5. That means that because 5 is larger than 4, it's going to show up last in all of the child elements that are within the main parent. And that's how order works. There's also the different flex where we can grow and change the width of the elements. And this is applied to each one of the items. So the default for the grow is going to be 0. But for instance, if we want page element number 2, and I'll set a background color for it so that we can identify the different elements. So that's going to be lawn green. So if we want to take element number 2 and we want to change the default width of it, we can apply the flex grow to it. And for the grow, we can set a numeric value, and the default is going to be 0. So if we do a flex grow 3, it's going to squeeze out 3 of the normal sizes that each one of the other elements is. So let's also try a few other ones. So if we do a flex grow 2 for element number 3, that's going to resize what our available space is. And this spacing will adjust depending on how much space we have for the page elements. So the grow 2 and the grow 3, when the page doesn't have the spacing, the 3 will be slightly larger, but when we do have the spacing to see for the 2 and for the 3 is the green one and the 2 is element number 3, we can see how on the full size screen, when the space is there, that it is allowed to grow. And that allows us to distribute the width of the children depending on what the remaining space is. And that's the key, that it depends on how much remaining space there is, which will allow and facilitate the grow of the elements. There's also a shrink. So defines the ability of flex item to shrink if necessary. So the default for shrink is 1. Let's set up a shrink for element number 4 because we've got grow on a few of the elements, and we'll do a flex shrink. So if we do a flex shrink 3, and I'll also set a background color for this one so we can distinguish it. So how about we set it, turn it purple. You're not allowed to put negative numbers, so keep that in mind. And there's a better example at the Mozilla Developer Network for the flex shrink. So you see that the default for flex shrink is going to be 1. So that's the default, so that all of the elements have a default of 1. If we change the flex shrink to 0, it's going to expand larger, and it's actually going to go outside of the available flex container. And if we go to 2, it's actually going to be half the size of the other page elements. There's also, for the element itself, you can apply the flex basis. So what flex basis does is this is going to determine how the default size of the element before the remaining space is distributed. So instead of setting a width of 100, let's apply a flex basis to the element. And the default for flex basis is auto. So that's what that is going to look like by default. And remember, we do have the flex growth on those elements. So that's why they're expanding larger than the other elements on the page. So the auto. And you can use different units. So you can use a percentage. So let's say I wanted 33.3% as the flex basis. So that would give me a grid with 3 columns, because that's taking up 33%. If I wanted 5 columns, I would do 20%. So that gives me 5 columns, regardless of the elements, and that resizes them. And then I can also set a pix width as well for the elements. So that gives me the basis to be 100 pix. And then the other ones, of course, they're resizing as they're growing. And there is also another way to do this, where this is a shorthand for the flex grow, flex shrink, flex basis combined. We'll go over to the Mozilla Developer Network for this example. So the flex, so it's a shorthand that allows us to grow, shrink, and fit the item depending on the space. So the default is going to be 1. And if we click to 2, so we get a flex of 2, so that's twice the normal width. We can do a 1 and a 30 pix, which will set the width for the other elements. And then we can do a 1 and a 1 and 100 pix, which also sets the width for the elements. So this is a shorthand for all 3 of the flex, grow, shrink, and basis. And then they've got the various options here and examples and exactly how to set those values in the syntax. And that's available at the Mozilla Developer Network under the CSS Flex. And you can just go over to the Mozilla Developer Network and search Flex, and that's going to return back the page within the search option. You can also align items on the page. So we just got the flex basis, and I'm going to change this back to 33%. And actually, let's do flex 33. So it's going to give us the width of 33 for each one of the elements. And if we want to change the default alignment for a particular item, let's select the element. So select element, the purple one. So element number 4. We'll update the alignment. So that is the property of align self. That's within the item itself. So if we center align that item, and I'm going to make this really small. And if I remove the center align, it's going to bring it to the top. So we can select each individual element and we can align where it's showing up. So the center centers it according to whatever the largest page element is, and this is taking the value from element number 3, which is at 350, so it's automatically centering element 4, because element 4, the height is smaller. So even if we were to adjust the height of it, it's going to space it out according to what is available for the element itself. There's some other options for you can do a flex end, which puts it at the bottom. Flex start is going to put it at the top, so that's going to be the default there. You can also do baseline, which keeps it at whatever the baseline is, whatever the default baseline is. So the default alignment for this is just where we are aligning all the page elements at the top. So if we were to center align those elements, and when we apply the align self to the element, it's going to override whatever the default is of the parent. So I'm just going to set a default for the parent. So for the main container, if we do an align items, and we want to put center align, it will center align the other items, but the one that we've set an alignment for will overwrite that default parent alignment and automatically adjust it to the flex end. So go over to the Mozilla Developer Network and you can try out some of these different properties for the alignment on the children, so the items that are within the main flex container.